Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to my channel. Today, I have a very special guest, Taylor Thomas, somebody who I interacted with really briefly. I believe was on the doctrine of tithing, Taylor. I
Mhm.
used to be a Christian, and I looked at our past, discussions in the DMs, and we were talking about tithing. And I used to be a Christian, but now I'm a skeptic. It's been about a good 4 years since I've, renounced my faith. And I know that you're an atheist and you have a passion for theology. You have a degree in theology. I mean, this is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's very, very unique. And so I would like for you to simply have your liberty, have the floor, tell us, how are you born and raised? Were you born and raised in a Christian home? And, how did you become an atheist? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, it was a weird journey. I mean, I was born in El Paso, Texas, but I was raised in Western North Carolina in the heart of rural Appalachia, in the Bible Belt, but in a particularly conservative part of the world. We weren't even allowed to
Okay.
sell alcohol. Like, we were a dry county, so small we didn't even have a movie theater, one red light. So I grew up, pretty conservative, or at least around a lot of conservative people, and that conservatism caused me to kind of resent Christianity for most of my youth.
Okay.
It didn't sit well with me, and especially like issues of gender. My society was very gendered, and I was pretty much a tomboy my whole life. Um, so, that made me pretty, like, hostile towards religion for a while, and then I got into Christianity in my late teens because I got really into, like, the social justice aspect of Christianity and the social gospel, and I attended a church that had, a pretty robust food distribution program and an after-school program for kids.
Okay.
So at that point, I was like, "Oh, okay, so Christianity doesn't have to be bad." And I still believed in God at the time, so I was like, all right, I could make this work. I mean, this resonates with me, the idea that I can believe in God and not be an asshole. Like, those 2
Yeah.
things like,
Nice.
I can help people, you know? Um, so I was very religious for a while, such that I would even go to monasteries and stay, for weeks at a time and just kinda, I think I even toyed with becoming a Catholic for a while. I got very into it.
Mm.
Um, then I went to Paris, France for the weekend when I was in college, and on that weekend, there just happened to be an ISIS attack, and I wasn't
Oh,
hurt. I mean, it was okay. I made it out. I was very, very lucky, but something about, like, sitting in a hostel and just thinking about all the people dying and thinking about, the series of events that had made it so that I was in the hostel that night and not, at one of the attack sites.
mm.
It started to bother me, you know, especially thinking about, like, is there a divine plan and why are innocent people getting gunned down? And then in the aftermath, I was talking to other religious people, and they said, "Well, God has a plan for you. That's why you didn't die." And that just kinda did
Yeah.
it for me. At that point, I was
Wow.
like, "That's I don't think that's how God would work." Um,
Yeah.
and so I just kinda I think one day I was walking to class, and I stopped on the sidewalk, and I was like, "I don't think I believe in God anymore." And that was
Wow.
I just couldn't believe anymore. That's the condensed.
So when you became an atheist, did you feel at all liberated? Like I know that there are people who are born and raised in like charismatic backgrounds where they'll say they felt a born again experience, like, they felt the Holy Spirit, things like that. Like, did you feel any sense of liberation? Like, could you say that the grass is greener on this side, relinquishing religious beliefs? And then, well, let me ask you, what then did you pursue theology academically after that decision, or was it before?
Yeah, yeah. I changed my major to religion in the aftermath of the Paris attack because I thought
Okay.
I had a feeling religion was already my minor, and the religion classes I was taking, reading religious literature and religious texts, and especially religious philosophies, they seemed to illuminate something that I was really craving. Just the particular questions some of those philosophies demand you interrogate and ask of you, even if I don't like all of the answers. It was
Yeah.
really comforting to me that we could talk about suffering and death and
Yeah.
these larger metaphysical questions and how they relate to ethics. So I leaned into my degree program even after becoming an atheist, and pursued a master's and a PhD
Wow,
in
that's
naturalist theologies.
wow. So how'd you do that? I mean, really,
Oh,
how'd you do it? Well,
I don't
let me
even
ask you
know,
one thing,
man.
really quickly, Taylor. Let me ask you: do you believe that the Bible is mythological, or
I mean,
do you believe it's like 100%? Like, do you believe there was a man named Jesus? He did miracles. He literally resurrected.
oh, no, no. I mean, I would say even when I was a Christian, I was very much on the fence about a lot of those things.
Nice.
I believed in a personal God of some kind. I was clear
Okay.
because I had this feeling. It was not I mean, it was not rational. It was totally affective. I just had this feeling there was God. Everything else, I kind of just said, well, maybe. And so I was one of
Yeah.
those people who looked at the character of Jesus and, took a very like left leaning interpretation of the gospels in terms of what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you asked earlier whether I felt liberated, and I think I did feel. Actually, no, I'm gonna say I didn't feel liberated because the most harmful aspects of my Christian upbringing, being steeped in Christian conservatism, the homophobia and the sexism and the threats of hell, I had already abandoned those. Like when I came to
Nice.
Christianity in my teens, I didn't believe in hell. Um, I didn't think that was a thing. I didn't think it was a sin to be gay or that it was a sin for a woman to minister or any of those things. So I'd already, lost some of those beliefs. So by the time I actually abandoned Christianity, it was more a loss for me to not believe in God actually, because I had
Wow.
built this very I guess nurturing image of a God who stands for justice and will intervene on behalf of people who are hurting.
Yeah.
So it was like it was kind of it shook me, and I don't
Yeah.
actually think I've ever recovered from that. I think I've
Wow.
kept on being a little shaken by it.
Wow. So, if I could hang my hat on one skeptical criticism of theism, it would be the
Mhm,
existence of evil. And I feel like, just based upon what you just shared, that it's the existence of evil. You talked about, innocent people dying and yet you're alive. And it's that's still the long age criticism towards theism.
mhm,
And I like to harp on evil happening to children when I debate these Christians. They often talk about free will, free choice. God gave humanity the free will to do evil, but yet here you have children who don't have a free will to be violated, to be murdered. We have child molestation that happens by the millions. They don't have no choice or free will. That's why they're victims. That's why they're helpless. And so then you have birth defects. You have babies by the millions who had no choice to be born with birth defects, deformities, certain sicknesses and diseases. It's terrible. And so I often criticize intelligent design. They say, look, what's the intelligence of child suffering, happening for thousands of years? Well, let me ask you, what are your views on eschatology? Because you are a theology major. I mean, you're very highly academic in theology. I mean, as if you were a Christian, if you were to assume that Christian worldview, what eschatology should Christianity be following today? What do you think?
Uh, that's a complicated question. I did try to write about a materialist eschatology that was just kind of grounded in using hope pragmatically, right? And not actually using hope metaphysically in terms of like Jesus will come and deliver us all. Cause I think those ideas are generally pretty dangerous. If I had to pick any kind of theism and any kind of belief related to theism, it would always be process philosophy or process theology.
Okay.
So it would be, maybe Charles Hartshorne or someone like that who has, a vision of Jesus in a vision of God's intervention that's co-creative, that doesn't just uplift this one sovereign, omnipotent, all-knowing, all everything deity, but actually has a God that's very limited in what that God can do, and is
Okay.
co-creating the world with humanity.
Okay.
Is
Oh
that
yeah.
familiar?
Oh
Or
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's very controversial. I mean, most Christians don't want to relinquish any omni attribute of God, or
Hmm.
it seems like you say like a more practical sense. Well, let me ask you now. Now that we're on here, tell us. I mean, Tillich today? I mean, what is
Mm.
it about Paul Tillich that obviously has inspired you? Tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, Tillich, I think I like Tillich because he is an existential philosopher, and I've always been extremely drawn to existentialism. But he's an existential philosopher who, unlike some of the other French existentialists, is really unwilling to, um, take a strong stance in an atheistic camp, even though he relinquishes all the attributes of God that most Christians believe in. I mean,
Yeah,
Paul Tillich is often accused of being an atheist by other
yeah,
Christians, and really,
yeah.
he basically is. I mean, when you get right down to it, he when he says God, he does not mean anything
Right,
recognizable to most people as God.
right.
But he still thinks that there's something religious about humans. We have ultimate aims that transcend everything else in our lives. We have, hopes and dreams and beliefs that we will, risk everything for. What he thinks of as ultimate concern. And, these aren't always empirical beliefs. Even when you get
Yeah,
outside of the realm of religion,
yeah,
they're not always empirical. There's not always a lot of evidence that you should pursue them. There's actually a lot of risk rooted in that. But he thinks, we have these spiritual tendencies and these leanings, and that we should maintain that language. We shouldn't give it up. And that actually, like, building norms and building community and building
yeah.
hope in the face of all this immense suffering relies in some ways on, having symbols where you can articulate not only your suffering, but your hope and your strength and, your tenacity.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so let me ask you, um, life after death. Do you believe
Mhm.
in an afterlife? Do you believe that there could be an afterlife?
I don't, but I want to.
Same here. Oh my goodness, that's exactly to the T how I feel. Please explain more.
I I have this deep-seated rage. Well, it's not a rage. I very much so there's a school of atheist philosopher that is very hungry to demonstrate that actually the afterlife would devalue this life in some way, that it would that our lives are more value laden because that's all we have, and that, it makes
Yes.
them more special. And I think that is
Yes.
just so dumb. And
Oh,
I
really? Oh,
there are good
wow.
I think the for on the basis of the argument, I get where they're coming from. I truly
Sure.
do, because this is,
Sure.
I'm not saying it's stupid, like, from an argument perspective. I
Okay.
just I think, it misses something, of course, I would want to see my friends and family again. Like, of course, I would want to carry on
Of course.
parts of this life. I don't think it's obvious that having something else in another realm necessarily devalues what I'm doing right here, And I think
Okay.
I've had plenty of experiences that I can think of where I'm like, man, I could stay in this moment. Like, if there was a way to capture this moment, what I'm feeling, and
Yeah.
just extend that for an eternity.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would love if that were a possibility, but I'm not convinced that it is,
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of,
based on this biology, essentially.
sure, sure, sure. Because I do believe, like, okay, well, if we have an afterlife, well, then what about the animals? What about other sentient beings? We have this human superiority complex. I'm not a vegan,
Mhm,
but I do see the vegan argument. I do see the moral and the ethical argument of not killing another sentient being, not killing other mammals, animals, and eating them. In Judaic Christianity and Abrahamic religions, the animals don't have an afterlife, but we're made in the image of God, so we do. But this
mhm.
is a huge one, especially for Christians and those who are wanting to exit the faith and make that leap of atheism. That is probably the most important question. Well, what about when you die? And I believe it was Epicurus, philosopher, who was talking about non-existent. And I live my life that way, Taylor. I try to have wonderful experiences now, even after my Christian life.
Mhm.
I still try to have fun. Pretty much the same person, but I often stated this many times that it makes this life much more valuable because it's all that we have. But you say that overall and it's ultimately dumb. And
Sorry, yeah, go
no,
on,
no,
go
no,
on.
no, that no, no, no. But I'm interested to see. This life is a journey. So I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I'm glad you can see that. Yes, because it's all that we have. We should, cherish this life more. do things. But I like you expound more
Yeah.
on this. Like, yes, I understand if we do have an afterlife, we can still be just as moral and just as ethical as in our life today. But I think Christianity teaches like store your treasures up in heaven. This life doesn't matter. It's but a vapor, just
Mhm.
dedicate your entire life over to Christ and you could miss out on so many opportunities that
Mhm.
this life would have given you because Christianity and religion overall has robbed you from it. So but these issues are so complex and they're so
Mhm.
dynamic that it's hard to just kind of just hang your hat on just one view. So please explain again, like, because like I said, I often stated it makes this life much more enriched. It makes it much more valuable because it may be all that we have. Just please
Mhm.
expound more. And somebody is asking a question. Her name is Lily. She's somebody who exited Christianity and now is in the world of skepticism, is where she's at.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, she says, "Is Taylor scared to die?" Wow,
I'm
this is a
terrified.
profound question.
I'm
So am I.
terrified.
So am I.
Um,
Oh my
I will
goodness, this
I
is
will go
crazy.
in. This is a big part of my research. I know I'm glad you're pushing back on that because I think I need to clarify.
Okay.
I absolutely agree with you that like if you don't believe in life like okay, so just on the ground, I would say I don't believe in life after death, and therefore, yes, I think that that in some ways does make me cherish this life in a different way than I did when I believed in the afterlife. I think what I push back on are is a particular type of philosopher who wants to claim that we wouldn't want an afterlife because if we had that afterlife, then life would be devalued. So that's the belief that I think is like kind of misguided. Not the belief that not having an afterlife does increase the value of this life or does
Yeah.
in some way place a different kind of burden on humans. So I agree
Yeah.
with you in what you're saying. Like yeah, when I stopped believing in life after death, suddenly there was this new anxiety about my choices and what I was doing with my existence, and almost like a new horror every time I saw an atrocity unfold. Like it made
Mm.
the problem of evil that much more devastating because I'll see an image of a child that's died in a bombing or something like
Yeah.
that, or any innocent person who's just lived a tragic life of suffering, and I think, damn,
Yeah.
like this is all they had and they suffered
Yeah.
that much. So yeah, in some ways, not having that belief in life after death does increase the depth or the seriousness of the situation. But I'm just not on board with the philosophers who want to claim that we wouldn't even want life after death or that life after death would
Yeah.
somehow be boring. There's a
Yeah.
couple of different books where the authors claim that actually life after death would be boring. We don't want it anyway. And that's where I'm like, well, I don't know about
Mm.
that. I want it. I just don't think it exists. And so that
Yeah.
changes my perspective. So,
That's so cool. That's so cool. Like there are 2 points that you brought up that in my intuition, how I feel, I could be in sync with you 100%. That's exactly to the T how I believe. I hope that there's an afterlife.
mhm,
But here's the question, like since we've relinquished Christianity, there's no heaven and hell like purgatory, even the Catholics believe, I mean, there's what do we do? What happens to bad people?
mhm,
And when we mean bad people, we're talking about like Adolf Hitler, okay, like
mhm,
somebody, Ted Bundy. What happens to them? And do we side with that, whoever's in control or whatever's in control of an afterlife? Like now this goes, okay, so now that you're an atheist, there is no higher power, there's no mind out there or multiple minds. That's like a simulation theory. So you reject a simulation theory as an atheist, correct?
yeah, I think I
Okay.
reject that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So
pretty
so
much.
so do you think that in the afterlife there is something in control or dictating or maybe set the scenario for an afterlife? That's where I'm at. That's why I
Mhm,
I just can't take that leap to be an atheist yet,
mhm,
because if there is an afterlife, is there something, or maybe it's natural, or maybe it's something that's all contained in our brain. But
mhm,
then if your brain dies, I mean, then what? It's like I hope that there's an afterlife, and if there's not, then this is all that we have. I mean,
yeah,
I'm just glad that me personally, I'm glad that I deconverted from religion while I'm young, and
mhm,
I commend those who are of an older age who relinquish Christianity, when they're in the older age, because a lot of times people hold on to Christianity because of fear of death, because they want to have that hope in an afterlife.
mhm,
They probably make themselves bitter.
Yeah.
if they were affected. You know what I'm saying? So I commend, the elderly who
Mhm.
make that choice, even at the tail end of their life, where they're convinced that there could not be an afterlife. It's like it's so altruistic, and especially when they voice that, it's like
Mhm.
wow, it's a high sense of altruism, But
Yeah. Yeah.
so are you scared? Are
Actually,
you scared to die? Yes, I'm afraid to
oh,
die. I'm glad you're afraid to die too. Yeah, because
I mean, I
it's
am.
scary.
It's a great unknown. No, this is another reason I like Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich voices this very clearly. He begins his whole philosophical project by saying, "Look, the biggest question that all of us ask, and actually that a lot of religious philosophies ask, is why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything exist? And the
Of
next
course.
question we ask is, oh my God, what happens when I don't exist? Like,
Yeah.
what happens when my being is suddenly non-being?" And he thinks that that's where all of this existential dread comes from, is these
Yes.
two basic questions.
Yep. And that question right there, why does everything exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Something it's an old age philosophical question. And when you remove theism from that,
Hmm.
then what do you have? It's like,
Yeah.
wow, it's such a mind-boggling question. Here's another question coming from Lily, and then we have another question from Eastgate Adoptionist. He states, how do you actually enjoy life knowing there is nothing when you die? This is a fear I had recently. Terrible anxiety. It's a really good question. What do you have to say on that, Taylor?
Well, I'm still working on it. I will say I just spent the last 3 hours playing Assassin's Creed, so that's one thing you can do.
Nice. Very
But
nice.
I I'm still struggling with it. I'm not sure how to cope with this yet. It's honestly gotten worse for me over the
Okay.
years, you know. It's intensified a little bit. But
Wow.
what I've endeavored to do is something similar to what you said earlier, in leaning into this, sense that if this life is all we have, then we need to take it very seriously.
Yeah.
My goal is to build good experience memories, have good experiences, and try to do my part in reducing the amount of suffering in the world. One of the things from Christianity, because I'm still very drawn to Jesus as a moral exemplar, and I still quote the
Really?
Bible
Okay.
quite a lot,
Nice.
especially
Nice.
the New Testament. And
Yeah.
one of the things that Jesus says, I forgot where it is, but one of the things that Jesus says is, to save your life, you have to lose it. And what he means by, like, my sense of what he means by that is, to actually have a good life that is full of flourishing and that is true to what humans are supposed to aspire to, you have to give to others. And I think historically that's true, because I had a minister who used to tell me, like, just get out of yourself. Stop focusing on yourself and your
Mm.
problems and what's bringing you down. Go feed somebody, go mow somebody's lawn, go play with a kid. And it sounds so silly, but honestly, it works, to a
Mm.
large degree. It doesn't make all that anxiety go away, but for those moments when you're just, paying attention to someone else and focusing on someone else,
Yeah.
um, it's very true that, like, you can get your own selfishly, you can experience your own sense of joy, and it can put things into broader perspective as well. It can, your problems, you're suddenly like, "Well, okay, that's a concern of mine, but maybe I can shelve that for a second."
Yeah, you can still have altruism. I still think that selflessness is very virtuous. And I like Jesus as a moral character. I mean, he had stated something, and I challenge Christians with this. When it comes, and I'm telling you, this is where I'm at. When it comes to like child molestation or child
Mhm,
abuse, child murder, I mean, I absolutely have zero mercy on this. I think this is terrible. And Jesus had stated, this verse, if any man harms any of these little ones that believe in me, it's better for them to have a millstone tied around their neck and tossed into the sea. And I often ask Christian ministers and pastors, I've had some formal debates with some scholars that had stated, I asked them, do you preach the gospel? Do you baptize them or do you drown them? Which one do you do? Do you offer grace and mercy to those who've abused children, or do you follow what Jesus stated, tie a millstone around their neck and toss them in the sea? And you
mhm,
eventually have to state, well, Jesus really didn't mean what he stated. He was being metaphoric, or he was being hyperbolic, or whatever have you. But I still view Jesus as a good moral figure in some sense. There are some things that he did and said that I think have no place in the 21st century. But overall, if I had to choose a religious figure that's like pretty much the man, I like Jesus. I'm not, but I do believe that he was a mythological figure.
Mhm.
I personally believe that there was a man named Jesus. Perhaps maybe he was crucified, but the miracles, no, I don't believe in that. I believe it's embellished.
Same. Yeah.
Jesus' resurrection, no different than any dying and rising god like Dionysus,
Mhm.
Osiris, all these other mythological literatures. I believe
Yeah. You
it
familiar
was.
with Richard Carrier's work? He
Oh,
seems
of
like
course.
you're
Okay, well, let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. I
yeah.
have to tell you this. I paid Richard Carrier $3,000 last year
Oh,
to
wow.
debate, yeah, to debate Don K. Preston. Okay,
Mm.
I'm so glad you just brought this up. And I never spoke to you about this, but Richard Carrier, we actually had a conversation with Derek Lambert. It was on Myth Vision podcast. I'm not sure if you are aware of Derek Lambert. He's actually
Mm-mm.
an atheist. Myth Vision podcast pretty much highlights that myth view of the New Testament. Well, there's a man, his name is Don K. Preston, somebody who I followed, and somebody who essentially his ministry led me out of Christianity. He believes in a doctrine called full preterism. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but it is a view of eschatology that simply means that Christ already returned in 70 AD. The
Uh,
Antichrist already took place. The rapture theory already happened. Everything in the New Testament was already fulfilled. And the reason why he believes this is because he's trying to save Christ from being a failed prophet. So Bertrand Russell, we all know him. He's very attributed to the atheistic literature. He criticized the second coming of Christ being a failed prophecy. He talked about even Christ's own words. C.S. Lewis brought this up, that Christ stated that he was supposed to return in his generation. So we have this expectancy in the New Testament that Christ was supposed to return already, and we're supposed to meet him in the air in the first century. But this man, Don Preston, I'll give you a brief synopsis. This man, Don Preston, debated Michael Brown, a famous Christian scholar, and he's carried this view of eschatology to the highest level of scholasticism. He wanted to
mhm.
debate Richard Carrier. Derek Lambert reached out to me, and I said, you know what, I will go ahead and sponsor this debate. Richard Carrier was, he wanted to debate Bart Ehrman at first, but Bart Ehrman was,
Mhm.
I mean, he's looking at like 10 to 15,000. Richard Carrier was much cheaper. So I paid for this debate. It happened in October. And so my channel is actually dedicated for that preterist community. So I'm so glad you brought up Richard Carrier because
Mhm.
he is somebody who debated Don, who even some of the
Mhm.
viewers here on the podcast know exactly who he is. So yeah, I mean, when it
Yeah.
comes to Jesus being a myth, I know Richard Carrier believes that Jesus was a staunch myth. Like he never really existed. It was just a myth. And I'm not opposed to that,
Yeah.
but I tend to believe that there was some sort of Messiah figure or whatever. But anywho, let me go ahead and get to this question really quickly. Thank you for your attention, by the way,
No, no,
Taylor. I
no.
know I
I
was
I
rambling
I
on
will
for a
say,
minute.
like, not to carry it back into Richard Carrier. I'm not full on board with Carrier, but I do think he
Okay.
gets pooped on too readily by the academy. Most academics are not even willing to entertain the idea of Jesus mythicism, and I get it. Like, they have some strong reasons for doing so, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very familiar with his work, and I'm not a biblical scholar, but I think it's very interesting. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, you go check out that debate. It's
yeah.
really funny. There is some, like I said, this man, his name is Don Preston. His ministry, his theology, essentially led me out of Christianity. And I stopped. I had a theology page called Theology Discussions. That's how you and I
Hmm.
connected. That's when I was still a Christian. But then somebody from that page reached out to me who was a follower of this man named Don Preston. And he had introduced me to this doctrine about maybe 5 years ago. And that was the beginning of the end. I eventually saw myself out. Well, let me ask you. I have this is a great experiment. Okay, you're a
Yeah.
theology student. Okay, if somebody came to you and told you, hey, there's a theology out there that teaches that Christ already returned, that this meeting with Christ in the air, the rapture theory, already took
Hmm.
place, that the great white throne judgment, the Lamb's book of life in Revelation, all of that was for the first century in 70 AD. The Antichrist, the Battle of Armageddon, everything that Christianity has been waiting for is for 70 AD. What do you think in a Christian worldview? What are some of the responses that you would have?
Oh, from the perspective of a Christian, I don't even know how to answer that because I was never in like I never even believed in the rapture when I was a Christian.
Okay.
I was a very lukewarm Christian, but I do know I have some, family and friends back home who have mentioned preterism by name and said, someone tried to tell me that and I hate it and tell me why, this isn't, correct. And I'm like, well, it depends on, which school of thought you take. And even the New Testament, right? I mean, this is a book that's compiled over the course of hundreds of years. There's several different movements that are trying to define who and what Jesus was. So I guess that would be my theological answer, would be like, look, this is just another variation on the Jesus story, on, what
Yeah.
is the function of Christ. I mean, I tend to think that almost every major tenet in Christian theology is a response to Jesus not returning and Christians trying to cope
Yes.
with that. Um,
Okay. Wow. That's so true.
I mean,
Yes.
that's my take on it. Even important concepts that I still use. Like I wrote my dissertation on grace. I think graciousness is ethically very relevant to today's world, but
Okay.
I think the reason you have such complicated theologies around grace and around, every form of salvation and around original sin, all these things is to deal with the fact that Jesus did not return and life is still
Yeah.
screwed up. And we got to figure out a way to explain how an all loving God who sent his son to die for us can feel so absent at this time.
Damn. Well, let me tell you. I mean, you're hitting things that are just touching home so much. Okay, well, so and I'm gonna get to Eastgate Adopt Joseph. I'm gonna get to your question in just a second, but everybody here in the preterist community, you're hitting a vein right now. Because oftentimes when people hear about this doctrine of preterism, full preterism, if you tell me that Christ already returned, the Lamb's Book of Life, the Great White Throne Judgment, all that already took place, the common response is, well, then what's in it for us today? Like, did Christianity end then back then? Is there anything for us today? And like you had stated, Taylor, that a lot of the Christian ethic, a lot of Christian criticism is we're waiting for Christ to return. We're waiting for him to come back, stop evil, new heavens and a new earth, right? But instead, what is Christ doing? He's sitting on a throne, sitting down stationary, dangling this promise of a new heavens and a new earth. One day I'm going to return. And generations after generations, 2,000 years, you have evil happening to children, innocent victims. You look at the Catholic Church and what they did to humanity, the crimes against humanity, and you go,
Hmm.
this is a failed prophecy. Bertrand Russell stands correct that this has been failing humanity this entire time, as Christians are still waiting for this new heavens and this new earth. And so I used to be a full preterist. I used to believe that Christ returned in 70 AD and that we
Hmm.
were somehow in the new heavens and the new earth, like this man, Don Preston, believes. And this, he debated Richard Carrier. And I believe Richard
Yeah.
Carrier won the debate. Many believe that Richard Carrier won the debate. I encourage you to go and check it out. It's a pretty dope debate. I think it's one of Richard's best debates, one of his best performances. It happened on Myth Vision podcast. But
Hmm.
thank you for your response. I mean, you're touching a vein, Taylor. Let
Yeah.
me go ahead and get to this question really quickly. Didn't you say, or he's talking to me, didn't you say you hold to a small percentage to a simulation? Don't lose that because we're in a test. Okay, that wasn't a question, but yeah, I do hold to a small percentage, Eastgate adoptionists, that there could be some sort of mind out there, some sort of game that this mind out there is playing. I don't know. But I haven't taken that leap to atheism just yet. Maybe I'm not brave enough to do so. Maybe I'm not like you, Taylor. I need a little bit of fortitude. Just be like, listen, there absolutely is no afterlife and atheism is true. Let me see what Lily states. I'm not afraid of hell or judgment, though. So that's a huge relief. Okay, well, that's cool. That's very liberating. Let me go ahead and see what else somebody had stated. I thought I saw a question earlier. Okay, I don't know who she's talking to. Okay, anyways, so again, so we talked about an afterlife, we talked about eschatology.
Oh, if I
So
do you mind if
go ahead.
I just raise one thing though,
Yeah.
to because I do want to say, like, part of what encouraged my dissertation was that I do believe that for all the flaws of Christianity and for all of the coping that their theologies are doing with this reality of, Jesus not returning and trying to, synthesize Greek philosophy with the Hebrew Bible, all of these things, I think the one thing that Christianity birthed into the world that really didn't what had not been birthed in that particular form in any other tradition is universalism and the idea of a universal human dignity, universal community in which no person is spiritually elevated over the other. And I think
Okay.
ethically that does still resonate today. Now in practice, Christians obviously almost never, like actually abide by that. But
Yeah.
philosophically, like you strip away all the theological components, philosophically, Pauline universalism, I think, is very, very ethically significant for the trajectory
Wow.
of how we think about like human rights, how we come to
Mm,
develop, different like ethical traditions. I just to
yeah.
put that in there so it doesn't seem like I'm totally trashing the tradition too much. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you: is Christianity a good thing or a bad thing? Should we eliminate religion from the human race? All
I
religion.
see. I think you're just not going to eliminate religious
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
I, I do some work at a research center, or have been, on and off for the past few years. I work at various research centers, and one of the projects we were doing is, we noticed in some data that religion was on the decline in the US and all industrialized countries religion's on the decline because secularization tends to do that. The more educated and the more industrialized you become, the less
Yeah.
religious on average.
Yeah.
America though is an exception. But in the US, the data shows that religious belief is declining. So people who report
Yeah.
belonging to an institutional religion is going down. However, afterlife belief and a belief in a generic God is remarkably stable. So it has not really been touched. So people still report believing in some sort of power. And
Mhm.
like there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this has something to do with the way our brains work, our
Mm.
evolutionary tendencies,
Yeah.
that religious thinking may be a byproduct of evolutionary, development, evolutionarily
Yeah.
significant capacities. So I think
Yeah.
that tendency is not going to go away. And that tendency, it's not, limited to religion. I mean, we tend to think in black and white and have all these cognitive biases, and there's a lot of religious quote unquote tendencies that we see in everyday life, outside of a religious
Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
But if I could make all of the crappy religious ideas go away overnight, I wish 100%. I think institutional religion generally tends to produce more harm than good. I would
Okay.
say. I
Yeah.
think. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of like the extreme ideas,
Yeah.
like for instance, I don't think anyone who believes in the rapture literally should have control of nuclear weapons. You know what I mean? Like
Okay. All
those
right.
ideas scare the hell out of me. Or even
Okay.
like, some people when they talk about life after death, it worries me if they have that belief and they are in charge of certain things because I'm like, well,
Wow.
you believe that we're all going to be fine. I don't think that. So that's going to change how we react. So
Yeah.
very, very particular beliefs that are rooted in religious dogmatism, I think are
Yeah.
extremely, extremely dangerous because they take the worst human tendencies and institutionalize them,
Mhm. And they
you
teach
know?
children. They teach children, and it's like, I
Eh,
mean, if you yeah, I mean, and when you're most gullible, when you're, very impressionable, when I talk about religion to grown adults, I look at I'm an educator, by the way.
mhm.
I teach history in high school level, and when I look at a 40-year-old, man or 40-year-old woman, and they're talking about and they're religious believers, I look at them like they're children because especially in the Western culture, they've been highly influenced by Christianity or any other Abrahamic religion at a very gullible age. And so it's like, this childlike faith, and you have Jesus that's pretty much telling you, oh, it looks like my camera went out. Can you hear me just fine?
I can hear you. I just
Oh,
can't see
okay.
you.
I'm going to go ahead and try to fix this. But you have these Abrahamic religions, especially Jesus, telling you to think like a child, become like a child, to enter to the kingdom of God. All this, and you're supposed to have this childlike faith, and it's like eventually I was tired of using faith as a cop out for reason. So it's like, in philosophy you have fideism, and faithism that's somehow superior to logic, and so it's hard for me. I mean, it's very difficult to me to keep using faith and faith and faith. So that's before I abandon the faith. But yeah, I think that these questions are very important. But let me ask you really quickly. I know you're very much involved in politics. Okay, please share your political views. Like, have your liberty. Tell us. what are some things that you're passionate about with our culture, our political culture? Um, what are your political views? What are you passionate about?
I think, broadly, I'd fall somewhere on the left. I don't think I'm sufficiently to the left for most people who identify as a leftist, and I'm okay with that. I
Yeah.
guess I still have a few conservative bones in my body. I guess I would identify most heavily with this brand of or this movement called religious socialism, which Paul Tillich was a part of. And it's essentially, I mean, it's very critical of capitalism. It has some inspiration from Marxism, um, but it's not full blown Marxism, and it's definitely less critical of religion broadly. But it's just the idea that we should strive for a society that maximizes human flourishing, and that we take care of people, much like some of the texts from the Gospels asked us to. In some ways, it's very reflective of those early Christian communities in Rome and around the Mediterranean, in which none were necessarily higher in status than the other, and the goal was to take care of one another, to create a communitarian framework. So I mean, that's broadly my politics. Is just I want to take care of people, and I
Okay.
want people to have the freedom to pursue the things within reason, without hurting other people, that are going to maximize their own flourishing. And the problem I see is that in America, especially, we tend to think of freedom as the freedom from domination by somebody else. So the freedom to get on your horse and go across the plains and, raise hell and build your house, your homestead, and just not be bothered by anybody else. That's how we think of freedom. And my conception of freedom is, that you can devote your life to being an artist because you have health care, and you're not starving every month, and you're not getting you're not living under the threat of bombs being dropped on you, and families can take care of themselves, and communities can come together and take care of one another collectively, and you have a kind of safety net, um in order to pursue different things and maximize human creativity. I think I'm drawn a lot to some things that Nietzsche said about human creativity and affirming life and living a life affirming existence. And one of his points is that he's trying to maximize the ceiling of what is possible for a human being. And I tend to think that rather than restricting people, living in community can actually liberate people to do more with their
Nice.
lives, you know?
Very nice. Very nice. We have a question right here.
Yeah.
It says, "What does the rapture have anything to do with nuclear weapons? Where is the connection?" I think that's maybe a statement you stated before. What do
Oh
you have to say
yeah.
on that? I'm gonna
I
try to
know.
fix my camera, by the way, Taylor.
Oh yeah. Are you there? Your video,
Yeah, I don't know
speaker.
what's
Oh,
happening,
okay.
but I can
Cool.
hear you just fine. Everybody
Okay,
can hear
cool.
you just fine. So don't worry about me. I'm just trying
Okay,
to make this camera work. I don't know what in the
cool,
hell
cool.
happened. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, this is probably more from personal experience than any, broad research that's available. But I think there's a lot of people who believe that we need to become accelerationists for the rapture, or that particular things need to happen so that the rapture can, ensue. So this is
Okay.
especially relevant to policies surrounding the Middle East. So there's this idea that if you just kickstart, the downfall of civilization, then Jesus will come back. I mean, I think it's pretty small in terms of the number of people who believe it, but I'm thinking like Mike Huckabee. Like Mike Huckabee is someone that I would put into this category of people who truly believe that particular things need to happen in order for the rapture to come. And I mean, maybe the
Yeah.
the example of nuclear weapons is too like extreme, but what I
Yeah.
mean there is just that people who believe that society has to get worse, or that a lot of death and decay and destruction has to happen so that Jesus can come back. I don't trust those people with weapons, or with global policy, or with any decision that affects human well-being on a massive level. I guess is
Gotcha.
my point there.
Gotcha. Let me see here. I thought I saw another question here, but maybe it wasn't a question. It was more of a challenge to somebody else. But okay, so we talked about life after death. We talked about eschatology a little bit. The existence of evil. Okay, let me touch on this. Okay, so why does evil exist? What can humanity do to stop evil? Is it something that's neurological? I know that Sam Harris, he's touched on this topic many times. He
Mhm.
believes that there's no free will in the human brain. I understand there's different neuroscientists, different philosophers who touch on this, but this is something that essentially has led many people out of Christianity, including myself. So, pretty much, why does evil exist? Like the ontology, is evil somehow a cultural thing? I mean, is it hinged on language, like Wittgenstein may say? I mean, what are your philosophies on this?
I think there's, a strong argument to be made that what we conceive of as evil is, socially constructed or linguistic, right? We're categorizing behaviors that we think to be harmful or antisocial or something like that. I think there's a strong point to be made there. I definitely don't think that evil is like an ontological substance in the world. But
Okay.
I'm not Augustinian where I think no, the only ontological thing in the world is goodness, and evil is just the privation of good or the privation of being in some way. Um, but I do tend to think, just for my own purposes, in terms of ethics, as evil manifesting in the absence of some sort of nurturing that is biologically and psychologically significant to human development, at least as I write about it. Now, I think
Okay.
there are still some aberrations. So you still have, you still have personality disorders. You still have antisocial behavior. You still have people who just like violence for the sake of violence, and that's because in my worldview, everything is just ambiguous. So this is a point Paul Tillich makes, where he says, "Look, everything in this world, no matter what it is, can either lead to constructive creativity or our flourishing, or it can lead to destruction in some capacity. Literally everything. There's nothing that's all quote unquote good or all evil." And I mean, Tillich would even extend this to his understanding of God, because for him, God is not a person or a being, it's just a kind of force in the world,
Gotcha.
from which, things emerge out from. And so that's how I tend to think about evil, is that we have all these ambiguous traits and ambiguous capacities and these ambiguous structures in the world. And for me, evil is anything that does not contribute to the flourishing and the happiness and the satisfaction of the human across this matrix of categories and um, traits and so on and so forth, if that makes sense. And I
Yeah.
think, I think a Sam Harris type would not be satisfied with that, because even when it comes to determinism or free will, I think I think there's good evidence that some amount of determinism is evident in the world. We do not have complete free will. Um,
Okay.
at the same time, I'm unwilling to say that we have no impact on anything whatsoever, even if it's just a minute impact. Maybe I guess I'm a compatibilist, though some people think that compatibilism is nonsense.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, do you often engage in any like debates? Like, in your heart, are you somebody who like embraces the controversy? You like to go back and forth and debate people? It could be like politics, religion, philosophy. Are you a debater?
I wanna say no, but I know that in real life, I'm always arguing with people. I'm deeply argumentative. Um, I like debate. I think it has to be the right structure. Um,
Okay.
I see there sometimes I watch debates and I think, "That was really productive." Like, the structure of debate worked here. Other times, though, I'm really put out with debate because, and this is a point that I take directly from Plato. Plato writes a lot about this, using Socrates as his mouthpiece, where he comes down really hard on debaters because he thinks debate actually doesn't prove who has the best conception of reality or who is closer to the
Yeah.
truth, but debate proves like who's the better speaker, who's better at rhetoric, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I like debates as long as it's not just, about who, sounded the most convincing, because I think there are a lot of issues that it's easy to make a convincing argument for something that, if you really took the time to think about it, is just wrong. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
So
Yeah. I mean,
I'm mixed
yeah.
opinion about it. I don't hate debate, but I'm very cautious about which debates, I get pulled into personally.
Yeah, I get it. I like to debate. And I do agree that performance and delivery is very important. I kind of look at it like a sport. Look at it
Mhm.
like a. But I do think that exchanging thoughts and ideas are very important.
Mhm.
And sometimes you have to be brazen. Sometimes you have to, have that like back and forth type. If it turns into an argument, sure. Just
Mhm.
as long as you're cordial, you're respectful, and all that. But
Yeah.
you just seem very just very incisive on theology. I feel like you can lead people to atheism. Like, is that a goal? I often get that all the time, like, oh, your goal is to lead people out of the faith. Well, I mean, it's not like I'm knocking on doors like an evangelist, trying to be like, hey, are you a Christian or you a religious person? Well, let me tell
Mhm.
you, atheism is true or something like that. Like, do you try to lead people out of Christianity? Is that like a virtuous thing? Like, maybe perhaps like you want to kind of deliver them from religion and show them the light of atheism? Is that something that it's kind of like I have that a little bit.
Mhm.
I want to lead people out of religion because I think it's good for them.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, that's
Yeah.
an underlying motive. Like, yeah, I think it's liberating. So, I mean, I'm not trying to like take away someone's hope and make them
Yeah.
cry, but at the end of the day, like, yeah, like if somebody's talking to me about religion, I think since I believe religion is false, then the ethical thing is to lead them out. Like, what do you think
Mhm.
about that? Like, is it ethical? Is it virtuous to lead them out of theism into skepticism or atheism?
I think there was a time when I was much more combative about the issue.
Okay.
And I did. I mean, I'll just say this: like growing up, I was really drawn to a lot of atheist thinkers, and I would watch.
Okay.
I mean, I would sneak Christopher Hitchens on TV like it was pornography. I was like
Nice.
thirsty for for
He
some
was my
voice.
favorite.
I liked all. I was really into all the new atheists for a time. Not so much anymore, but I was just like very desperate for some other like take on that.
Yeah.
Now I'm much more interested in just getting people out of bad theologies or theologies that are harmful to other people, because I'm not so sure anymore that I don't even think I have great arguments against God. Like for me, my non-belief in God is totally about the fact that I don't feel much of a presence in my life, because I tell people, like, if I really felt that God was in the room with me, I'd come up with an argument that would satisfy me.
Okay.
I mean, I tend to think that the arguments for the non-existence of the Christian God are much better, because, to have a Christian God, you have to accept, not only that there is a God, but then a million other impossible premises. Um,
Yeah.
but, I'm less interested in talking people out of theism and more interested in talking them into a kind of ethical worldview, that I prefer, that is tenable with their theism. And I
Nice.
think the other part of that is like I still go to church on occasion. I still celebrate certain rituals.
Really? That's
So
cool.
I still
I haven't
participate in
stepped
Ash
foot in a church
Wednesday.
in years. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Okay.
But it's because I have a very personal connection to certain aspects of Christianity. Like,
Okay.
when I would go to the monastery, even when I wasn't, very dogmatic about my beliefs, there was something about the monastery that was pretty self-transcendent. And I think this is one of the reasons Paul Tillich refused to let go of his, theological language, because he was like, "Look, I don't believe in the literal like existence of a lot of these things, but symbolically they do
Yeah.
something for me. They're facilitating some sort of awareness." And so, like, for me, Ash Wednesday, I don't celebrate that in the way most Christians do, but Ash Wednesday facilitates some awareness about my finitude, and the ritual of it does something that kind of heals me in a way.
Okay. All
Um,
right.
so there are all these aspects of, my tradition that I still
Yeah.
take, really seriously, even though I've abandoned, some of the beliefs surrounding them. And I think I don't want to let go of all of those things, and I don't want to let go of the language of justice, that was espoused by someone like Martin Luther King Jr. I've talked a lot about this on
Yeah.
my show, that I think a lot of people that are more towards the left, or who are more liberal or more left leaning, tend to just let conservatives have that language and weaponize it. And what I want to see is religious people who do believe in God using that language to do the opposite, to heal people. Because if religion is going to exist, I want it to be used to make life better for people, even though
Yeah.
I know that that's a dangerous
Absolutely.
game.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that you made some very powerful, profound statements. Here we have a homemaker calling saying, "How does your family handle your beliefs?" That one hits home. My family are still Christians. I grew up in a faith. And by the way, I don't know what the hell is happening with my camera, but I can see you just fine, hear you
Mm,
just fine. Even if I exit out, like I'll hit my start cam and it'll exit me out, but you can, everybody can still hear you just fine. So if
okay,
I
cool.
go in and out, everybody can hear you just fine. I'm gonna try to do a little.
Mhm.
I don't get when I hit the camera, but everybody can hear you just fine. But here's a question: how does your family handle your beliefs?
Well, my dad's pretty much agnostic and has always been. So it's, I remember when I started studying theology, he said, and I quote, "I hate everything about GD religion. I don't understand why you're studying that when you could do so many other things."
Okay.
Um, but really, he hates the hypocrisy of it. But he's not an atheist. He won't claim atheism because he's like you. He's like, I can't make the leap. Like I think there's evidence that maybe there's something, but he doesn't think it's Christianity at all. The rest of my family, though, I mean, I get text often about it's going to be so lonely with you in hell and us not there.
No way. That's
Um,
terrible.
I mean,
Oh
it's
my
they think they're
god.
doing me a favor, like, and I've got some liberal family members who are not, quite that bad. They're just like, well, I don't believe that, but that's fine for you. I don't think you're a bad person. But I've got some very, extremely sexist, extremely homophobic family members
Oh,
that are just,
wow.
like, yeah, you don't come to Christmas here. And I'm fine with that.
Really? That's terrible. Oh my god. Just
Eh.
like Christopher Hitchens stated, religion makes normal people, morally normal people, do and say, wicked things, and it's like, it's terrible.
Hmm.
I mean, I have family members, I have friends, pretty much the same way. I feel that heartbeat.
Hmm.
My father didn't talk to me for over a year, so
Oh,
it's like,
wow.
yeah. And my father used to be a pastor, so that question, Lily, thank you for that. How does your family handle your beliefs? Yeah, it hits home. But you know what? I believe that your motives are very, very pure, Taylor. Like, I think you're very, very genuine. And so it's like, that's the same thing with me. It's like, listen, this is what I believe is true. I'm not trying to hurt anybody, but this is what I believe is true. And I'm no rookie at this. You know what I mean? Like, most Christians haven't even read the Bible from front to cover, and they want to talk about these deep, advanced theological controversies. And so, to me, it's like, look, I'm just somebody who's trying to pursue truth. And
Hmm.
I sense that same kinship with you. Well, look, we're already at the 1 hour mark. I do want to respect your time. There are those who can go on for 3, 5 hours, like myself, like Bereans, right? Like from sunrise to sundown. But are there any other topics, any other, anything you like to share that you feel very passionate about? Anything that you feel like we need to cover that we haven't covered already?
I mean, I've got time, but if the audience has any questions that I, haven't answered or anything like that,
Okay.
I'm happy to stick around to do that. If you don't mind, I'll plug my own little, I've got a YouTube page called Bite Guys, where I house a
Yes.
lot of videos on some of these things. So people should
Yes.
check that out if they're interested. I don't live stream that much, but every once in a while I throw out a live stream.
Cool. Yeah, I think I already put it in the link in
Oh,
the
cool.
description. If not, I'll do it again. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that in the 21st century, um, I don't know how long religion will survive. I do
Hmm.
remember Christopher Hitchens, and I know Christians use this one a lot. They asked him, like, what if there was like one religious person, or he had mentioned, like, what if there was only one religious person left here on earth? Would you want that person to relinquish religion? He
Hmm.
stated there was a part of him that stated no. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Hmm.
He had stated that. And so it's like they say, well, that means that there's a part of him that believes in a God, or there's a part of him
Yeah.
that believes that Christianity is real. So what do you have to say on that? I looked at it like, well, maybe it was like, religion is a cultural, historical artifact. And I think that maybe he was admiring that sense of anthropology with religion, that it's been such a historical artifact in the human race that he wouldn't 100%, even if it was only one human being that was leaning on faith, that believed in religion, he wouldn't want it to be eliminated. That was one. I think it was a cool statement from Christopher Hitchens, and I admire that man. What do you think
Hmm.
about that statement?
I think I sympathize with Christopher Hitchens there. I mean, I'll be honest. I hang out with a lot of Christians and go to events that are centered around Christianity, knowing that most people don't share my sentiments exactly.
Yeah.
I still have I still like talking to different people about their particular brand of theology, even if they're theists. So I still respect, that line of thinking. And I like to think that, like very educated theists who are trained in theology and philosophy are able to sort of keep me on my toes and keep me from, being too, I guess, static or lazy in my thinking. But I guess the other part of that, and this is something that I've thought a lot about, especially, after kind of becoming infatuated with new atheism, is I think like I'm trying to resist seeing religion as the one place where quote unquote irrational behavior manifests. Because I've seen that, be the position of a lot of atheists. And I think that there is something unique about religious metaphysics, because positing that there are supernatural agents and that there's a god and that there's a heaven and there's a hell, all these things, like that's very unique in terms of worldview building. And I
Yeah.
don't want to say that like there aren't like it's not comparable to a number of other beliefs that we might call illogical or irrational. But I also think
Okay.
that like the paradigmatic things that we don't like about religion, most atheists, leaning into ideas we find nonsensical, believing stuff without evidence. That's
Yeah.
just something humans tend to do
Yeah.
across the board about a variety of things. Being dogmatic, there's a lot of atheists, especially if you go into some of the Reddit forums, that just cling to particular ideas. Or if you look at our political spectrum right now, there's a lot of people that align with a particular version of reality, and if you show them evidence, it's just they won't hear it.
Yeah.
So I think like I'm trying to spread awareness more so about how cognitive biases and how these heuristics we use to navigate the world, how they can quickly become so dangerous and deceive us into believing things that we should really take with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I think religion is nasty at doing that. It tends to do that easier, and it preys on people who are vulnerable a lot of the time with easy answers. But I think a lot of different institutions and worldviews do that.
Yeah. Absolutely. What can you say? Has religion done more harm than good with humanity? I mean, that's something that is, a philosophical investigation that, I think arises a lot of controversy. And I'm
Hmm.
uncertain, to be quite honest with you. I do believe that if there was good that came from religion, it's because the human was good. If there was bad that came from religion, it's because the human was bad. But yeah,
Yeah.
there are some doctrines, that can make, people turn bad. But yeah, I think that we covered, a lot of, good topics. I know that we're barely scratching the surface on this, which is why like I kind of wanted you to like, share some of your own thoughts and maybe share some of your own topics that maybe we didn't cover. But I think we covered a wider range of I think very important questions.
Yeah.
Life after death, the return of Christ, culture, things like that. Politics. I mean, let me ask you: capitalism or socialism? Which one, or is there an alternative?
I mean, as I
Right.
tell my students, there's more than two. There's more than two. I mean, I tend to be very critical of capitalism because I think just the logic of capitalism can be pretty self-eating. But I suppose I'd put myself more in the social democracy category, which is not nearly enough for most of, because I have a lot of Marxists and like hardcore leftists on my show, and they
Oh,
definitely
okay.
judge the heck out of me for that. Um,
Nice.
but I think my problem ultimately with like uh, the way that we do capitalism in this contemporary world is like we could look at the Norway model or a European model and say, well, they have capitalism, but they still provide for their citizens, and there's still some socialist elements, whatever. But
Yeah.
like capitalism depends upon exploiting somebody always, always, because you have to keep maximizing, you have to keep producing more. So it's not enough that like you make a consistent amount of money. The next year you have to grow. It's infinite growth, which is like biologically we call that cancer, just growth for the sake of growth. Um,
Yeah.
So I do want to do something about that. And I feel very strongly about the fact that like where I'm from, it's very poor. And one of the reasons it's very poor is because we're extremely resource rich. Surprisingly, we have a lot of coal in Appalachia, but we also have a ton of mica and feldspar and other minerals like quartz. And that's
Okay.
significant because it's some of the purest quartz in the world, especially in the Western world. And all of that quartz goes into fiber optic cables and computer chips, and essentially has funded or has made possible the AI boom. All of the technologies that
Wow.
AI relies on. So my town specifically, is actually one of the top exporters outside of China. But
Oh, wow.
what happens with every community that is an extraction based economy is that you have outside investors essentially artificially making sure that the community itself remains poor and remains, impoverished laborers, while everybody else enjoys that wealth, instead of that wealth actually contributing back to the community. So you see this a lot in other countries. For instance, like Africa, with the African mining epidemic, you have virtual slave labor there. So I think until that issue is fixed, I'm not going to be sold on the value of capitalism, even though I know some of the arguments about capitalism lifting people out of poverty. At the same time, though, like I refuse to claim fidelity to Marxism or to any particular ideology, because I think all of those movements have also caused a lot of harm to people.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, I I'm very critical of capitalism. I would like to see more worker owned operations. I would like, I'm a strong proponent that you can use the government to do very good things. Like, the government can be problematic, but it can also be used to
Absolutely.
make sure that, there's equitable distribution, and that people are protected from predatory exploitation. So that's what I want to see.
Absolutely.
However that
That
works out, whether you call it social democracy or socialism, or what, I don't care what it's called. I just want to see people, have enough to live.
that's awesome. Yes. That's very good. I mean, I feel heart to heart with that. I feel like that's the most safest, best answer and paradigm to live out your life, and to view politics in that way. Well, we're already at the 1 hour mark. Are there any closing statements that you'd like to make, Taylor? I'll go ahead and post your YouTube
Mhm.
channel and link in the description. But any other closing remarks? We covered a broader range of topics, but we barely scratched the surface on a lot of them. But anything else you like to say?
I think I just hope that people remain curious and empathetic. I think curiosity and empathy can go a really long way, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're curious without caring how it affects other people, well, that can be very bad, because that means that you're just, cutting open a dog to see how it works. Like, it can lead to some
Yeah.
bad things. But like, if you're curious and you care about other people, well, you start to question, what you're sold a bit more. And I think that's a good thing, to care about truth and to care about goodness. And I think that's at the heart of philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel a kinship to that. I really do appreciate having you on. This is the first time that we've actually had a discussion, and
Mhm.
there's so much that you stated that hits home, that I feel a kinship from. And I think that you're changing those who view your channel, those who hear what you have to say. Now, you said you have students. Are you teach at a university, or are you an educator?
Yeah, I adjunct around right now. I'm trying to get out of academia, but at the moment I'm just kind of, teaching
Are you
courses.
an addict? That's
Mhm.
awesome. People don't understand, Taylor, how hard it is to land that. And you landed that. Oh my goodness. It would be great if you become a tenure or something like that eventually. Wouldn't that be
Uh,
amazing?
that is not gonna happen.
What do you mean? For you,
It's
I believe so. Oh my
No,
goodness.
there's academic politics, and honestly, just tenure track jobs are drying up. The humanities is
Okay.
really, I mean, the university is under attack right now. A lot of
Okay.
schools are defunding, and honestly, unless the student debt crisis gets, taken care of in some way or fashion.
Yeah.
It's not gonna make sense for people to go get a liberal arts degree, unfortunately. I want to create those opportunities for people because it definitely changed my life as a first gen student, but, I'm
Yeah.
practical. I can see that our society is gonna have to make changes if we want that to be an open possibility for enough people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but even to get on as an adjunct, that's still, I mean, the chances of that is slim and none. Like, it's difficult. Even if you have a master's degree, PhD, you know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
hard. So I commend you for that. I
Oh,
mean,
thank you.
yeah, I mean, I think your level of insight on theology, on philosophy, on science is very beneficial. You know what I mean? Like, I'm excited to what the future holds for you, and I just can't tell you like enough that I'm glad I met you. I'm glad we ran into each other.
Mhm.
Like I stated before, I think it was years back we were talking about tithing,
Yeah, I
and that
saw one
was
of your
one.
videos. I thought it was
Yeah,
really
okay, so
well
that's
put
how it
together.
happened, yeah. Yeah, and, a lot of my pastors at that time, they were like, "Oh, no," you know what I mean? "You're rebellious, the
Hmm,
devil's encouraging you and inspiring you," and I heard all that nonsense, but I'm very
yeah.
passionate towards that doctrine. It's been robbing humanity since, like, the 6th
Mhm.
century, telling people you're gonna go to hell if you don't pay 10%. It's terrible, you know what I mean? Like, you're telling this to, like, single mothers who are struggling to pay their bills, you know? You're
Yeah.
telling this to, people for decades. It's terrible, but, I remember that's how we connected. I seen some of your content, and, philosophy, is so very important. I think that Christians don't get enough of it. I think another question too is, can philosophy and religion coexist? Can philosophy, religion, and science coexist? I actually studied at the University of Edinburgh when
Mhm.
I was a Christian, and when I stopped becoming a Christian, I dipped out. I didn't want to study anymore. I already had a master's degree. I wanted a degree in philosophy, science, and religion. It was a hybrid degree,
Mhm.
and it
I
was
think I
all
might know some
online.
people who did that program, actually.
Really? That's so
Yeah.
cool. I was in
In
that.
Scotland,
Yeah.
you were
In
yeah.
Scot I wasn't in Scotland, it was all online. You can get your
Oh, yeah.
master's degree distance learning, yeah. And I took out
Huh.
a Sallie Mae loan at that time, and when I stopped becoming a Christian, that was it. I didn't wanna do anything
Mhm.
else, like, theologically, I took a nice little break for, like, a couple years. And man, it was liberating, People often ask me like, "Okay, so how is your life now that you're not a Christian?" It's like, I'm still the same person. Like, I'm not going out trying to steal from anybody. I'm not trying to fight nobody. I'm still the same damn person. I think I'm even more ethical, more loving, not believing that human beings are under a curse from Adam and there's demons everywhere, like it's just the grass is greener on this side. So when I saw that you were an atheist and you also have a degree in theology. I think that is just so cool. I think that's so unique. I think that you're pretty much every theist's worst nightmare. I think that you're every Christian's worst nightmare. Like, I truly believe, like, I would absolutely love to have you. If I was in a debate, I would love to have you by my side, like as a tag team. Like, I feel like we could really lead people out of religion. And so, anyways, I highly respect you, Taylor. Like, I
Oh,
think you're
thank you.
you're I think you're super cool, super unique. And you know what? Like, I'm looking forward to what the future holds for you. I
Yeah.
hope that you become a tenure. You know what I mean? Like, maybe at Oxford, I see you like somewhere like that. Like, it'd be so great. Even Edinburgh, my goodness. Princeton or Cambridge or one of those.
Mhm.
I just think that you're pretty incisive. I think you're very intelligent. And yeah, I mean, I'm inspired. You inspire me. So, thank you so very much for coming
Yeah.
on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for
And
having me on. We'll
well,
we'll get
thank
you
you.
on Tillich today or on
Yeah,
Bike I stream. I do
yeah.
streams all the time, so
Awesome.
yeah.
Hey, invite me. Hopefully I get
Yeah.
this camera issue. I don't know what the hell's happening with this. Like, if I try to turn on my camera, it literally exits me out of the entire podcast. I'm like, what the hell's happening? So it's safer for me to just be here. But you've been such a good sport. I mean, I think that you've my goodness, like your level of insight. I know that we're barely scratching the surface. So I would like to know more, from you. You know what I mean? I feel
Mhm.
like you're
Yeah.
you're definitely a world changer. I
Oh,
feel like
thank you.
anybody, yeah, I feel like anybody who interacts with you on any level, whether they're a novice or an expert, like you have that, I feel like real recognizes real. I feel like, I've been born and raised in this, so I know those who are real to this. And, you're definitely somebody who fits that category. So I'm honored, like
Oh, you're too
you're,
nice. Too
yeah, you're
nice.
super chill too. Like, you're hella cool. So Thank you so very much. Look at what Dean Kruger states. He stated great discussion. Well,
Oh,
thank
nice.
you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you so
thanks.
very
And
much.
I'll get you on the podcast soon. We'll
Yeah,
chat.
let me know. Yeah, let me know what's up. I appreciate it. Well, thank you,
All
Taylor,
right.
so very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah, and we're gonna go ahead and sign off, you guys. You guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you later.
Thanks,
Bye
everybody.
bye. Bye bye.